One thing that I believe is very important that I don't talk about as much as I could, and I don't talk about as much as I used to. It used to be like a very important and pivotal thing in my life, a very big focus of mine, is that I do want to encourage people to understand that right now, while we may not be exposed to as much supernatural things in the mainstream, and that may not be the way that a lot of people live their lives on a daily basis, if you're a believer, I'm a Christian, right? I believe in Jesus. I'm an Israelite, but I believe in Jesus, right? And that's not something that conflicts or contradicts. It's just you got to say both. You know what I mean? If you believe both, you got to say both. So what I'm saying within this is understanding that it is important that we have a certain level of a supernatural worldview, right? And even if your life isn't immersed in the supernatural right now, you still have to have a perspective of how you're going to go about understanding these things if these situations were to occur, right? So I know I talk about the blur pill ideology a lot, right? The blur pill, the blur pill, the blur pill. One, because in the state that we're in right now, one of the most important things to keep people safe is that we need to get to a place of having better relationships, better love in the community, and better dynamics of polarity, and get to a better place of alignment and integration within our spiritual lives. A big reason that I focus on anime and sci-fi and fantasy is because I got into a lot of this stuff because I was into it from a very young age. But there was also a point in my life that was very heavily predicated upon my studies, not only within philosophy, but within spirituality and apologetics. And one thing that I realized is just throughout that time, I would study different aspects of pretty much ancient alien theory from a perspective of the Bible. So let's say we're talking about the Nephilim, right? Let's say we're talking about, the Anunnaki, the Titans, Epic of Gilgamesh, talking about, the ancient Egypt. And one thing that can happen is this, right? And I think this goes in line with some of the videos that I've been making lately when it comes to Star Wars, right? On a philosophical level. Right? A lot of people are in a mind state of good versus bad, right? But it's on a level that conflates and blurs the lines, not in a way of things being a gray area, but more so from the perspective of seeing certain things as good that are bad and certain things that are bad as good, because certain things are separated out of their understanding of what these things are. You have to understand what a Hegelian dialectic is. If you do not understand what a Hegelian dialectic is, you are very liable to be deceived in one way or another. Sometimes a person will create a problem and then present to you the solution to the problem that they created. They will present you a problem and a solution for the problem that they created for you. Or maybe a problem that you created for yourself. And what I'll say is this, stimuli is neutral. So sometimes a Hegelian dialectic can be something that's beneficial, right? Like, let's say you're in a situation where you're masculine submissive with your partner, right? And when you're in a masculine submissive place and your cup is starting to get low, sometimes what can happen is you start going through certain things emotionally, mentally. There's nothing you can do to change your mood. Sometimes it benefits for your partner to become a bigger issue than what you're experiencing from a logical, calculated perspective, and then to solve that issue. And then from becoming the bigger issue and then solving that issue, then when the bigger issue arises, then you get to a feminine submissive place. And then to solve that issue, it creates trust in their leadership, right? Now, how that can work sometimes is a matter of, you were getting off in your energy towards them. Your dynamic was being thrown off. They couldn't speak to you logically to repair the situation. So they had to do what they had to do to make sure that your dynamic was working correctly. Now, that's a different perspective from what I'm talking about, but I do think that it's somewhat beneficial for me to cover that. Now, what I am about to say is this. Look into certain things, right? Because there are some people who touch on spirituality, but they touch on spirituality from a perspective of denigrating and speaking down on the Bible. And they speak on it from a perspective of denigrating spiritual values that would be found within the Hebrew mindset and culture. And it's not really about the Hebrew mindset and culture as far as seeking to know God and knowing that you're known by God and experiencing the love of God in your lifetime. Having experiences that make you aware with the presence and the possibility of supernatural experiences. Some people have experienced these things, some people have not. And if you have not, and you're enmeshed in religion, but you have not experienced supernatural lifestyles or supernatural experiences, then you're going to put yourself in a very bad position. Another thing that can happen is if you're overly reliant on the supernatural, right? But you don't have a clear focus or a focal point. You're overly focused on the emotion of certain situations, but you don't have a clear focal point of knowing what spirit is speaking to you, then you're going to be in a very bad and tough position, because whatever spirit is bringing power to you in that moment is going to be what you accept. So we're in a certain day and age where one thing that, it may work like that, it may not work like that. But one thing I heavily emphasize in my own point of view is that just from a perspective of sci-fi and spirituality, I think it's good to have certain ways of identifying and defining certain terms, certain creatures, certain things through somewhat of a biblical lens, right? This is from my own perspective. So when I hear the word alien, I think angels, right? When I hear the word ghost, I think demon, right? When I hear certain creatures, when I hear chimera, I think Nephilim, I think hybrid creatures. When I hear the word immortal, right, there's different things that I think of. Like, think about the Epic of Gilgamesh. Utnapishtim was Noah from the Bible, right? So since Utnapishtim was Noah from the Bible, and the people in the time of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the stories that they got this information from, they couldn't live that long to see the age of Noah, so they assumed that he was an immortal. Let's say we're looking at the Greeks. The Greeks had the Titans. Well, the Titans sound like the Nephilim to me, right? You have the Sumerians. They had the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki sound like the Watchers to me, right? All of these things that I talk about, they tie together. And a lot of these things and these concepts can be found within the context of anime, within sci-fi, within different cultures, within different religions, within different ideologies. There's people who go around pushing this narrative that Egyptian society came before Christianity by so far, so because it's older, it's better, when they don't even realize the idea of the false trilogy. They aren't even up to date with the idea of, well, you have Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. That's Horus, Osiris, and Isis, right? And this same trinity is throughout most religions in the world. And these are different things that I look at from a perspective of just understanding that although I'm not going to go around shitting on people's religions, although I'm not going to go around and be upset with people, although I do believe that there are some people who may have what they think is a completely different religion, but then they may end up having a relationship to God that's going to be stronger than some people's relationships to God, and more present in their relationship to God than people who are Christian in name because they formed a connection with the true being. You know what I mean? I do believe that's something that can happen, is happening, and will happen, right? But I do believe it's better to be safe than sorry. So just from my perspective, I know while I'm not somebody who is super against the New Age, because certain things that appear to be New Age are just the exposing of information that has always been present, and it's the exposing of information that is neither good nor bad. It's just information. But when information abounds, it's very easy for subtle manipulation and subtle deception to sneak its way in. And these are all things that are possible. These are all things that are possible. And part of the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I believe that as a man, it's important that part of our leadership means that we have to have a certain level of spiritual knowledge and spiritual understanding and a system or an idea that we accept, we understand, and we can be feminine and submissive towards. A man has to be feminine and submissive towards his God first and foremost. Now, if you don't agree with mine is, hey, listen, I understand, bro. Like, people have different points of view. You know, it's better to live by morals and principles that you see in a book than to be feminine and submissive towards whatever spirit comes along your path. Right? And it's better to follow that logic to its furthest logical conclusion. One thing that I've noticed a lot of lately is that people who used to be pastors, people who used to be spiritual, people who used to speak on things from a perspective of wanting to be a spiritual person point of view, they're starting to become atheists. But a lot of logical people who used to be, very pragmatic, logical agnostics, a lot of agnostics are starting to become believers. And a lot of times they're starting to become believers in God or believers in Jesus, because they're starting to resonate with the principles and the parables of God. Like it says that a wicked and adulterous generation will seek out signs. So when I'm speaking of these things from a spiritual perspective, I am going to say things that are going to sound like, they contradict what people think that they believe when it comes to the Bible, when it comes to spirituality. But understand that I'm a man where God has been a very big part of my life. And I'm not even somebody who's going to go around saying I love God. I'm somebody who knows without a shadow of a doubt that God loves me. I know without a shadow of a doubt that Jesus loves me. Do I need somebody to prove that to me? No. Do I need to walk around trying to prove that to other people? No. I am what I am. And there's a certain level of contentment that I get out of that. And I could probably break down the psychology and the philosophy of that, but that's not what I'm here to do right now. I do want to express that we do need to have somewhat of a supernatural worldview and a frame of reference, because there have been things that have been transpiring over the last few years, right? Different government agencies have been preparing for aliens to come, right? There have been different spiritual things that have been occurring. I've been hearing that what appears to be demonic possession is on the rise. There are different pervasive thought processes that are transpiring. There are different things transpiring that do give rise to certain things. And my goal is not to push fear. I don't want people to have a perspective of feeling like I'm fear-mongering, because I'm not fear-mongering. I'm not living my life in fear every day. I'm living my life taking the steps that are in front of me day by day, right? I have a path, I have a purpose, and the things that are in my path and the things that are in my purpose that's what's important to me. And we all have different areas of focus. We all have different areas that we are more geared towards. We all have different areas that are things that we are more suited to be able to help others with. Not everybody has to be a super intellectual. You know what I mean? Not everybody has to be talking about super spiritual stuff. Things, simple shit can be spiritual. Growing food can be spiritual, right? Having a garden can be spiritual. Talking about sex can be spiritual, right? Understanding leadership and respect and honor, those things can be spiritual. Everything is spiritual to some capacity. So when we understand these different aspects of it and integration, we have to understand that spirituality is something that also has to be integrated into our lives. And you don't have to expect or feel insecure if you don't immediately have just the most supernatural experiences just out the gate, because chasing after those emotions is something that will put you in a bad spot. Like, chasing after that feeling is something that will cause you to be in a very bad position in life, right? Because with all the overstimulation that's out here in this day and age, with all the different spirits that are lingering around, with the different things that the deception that was already seeded in through the way that we've interacted with religion, right? The Gnosticism that was put in to cause us to be in positions where we had an inability to see the good in physicality, right? Just seeing physical as being inherently wrong and inherently evil, and seeing things as spiritual as inherently good, and not being able to discern spirits, not being able to discern, the real world, not being in alignment and polarity within ourselves and our relationship with God and our relationships with people around us, having experienced bad leadership. I don't want to add on to people being in a position where it's going to be difficult for them to avoid deception. Like I don't want to add to that. Right? So what I'm talking about in my videos, it's not about distracting people from spirituality, right? These things go deeper than it seems like it does. A lot of these sexual concepts, a lot of these things, they started from a perspective of me taking a stance of wanting truth more than I wanted tradition. And when I wanted truth more than I wanted tradition, you know, I did a lot of study, I did a lot of research. Remember, I was in apologetics before I got into a lot of different things. And just during that time, I learned certain things, and I just understood that trying to force people to believe what you say because you feel like God said it, or trying to force people to believe what you say using the Bible as a weapon is not something that helps anybody believe anything anymore. Right? It helps people who are afraid, and it forces them to try to believe you, right? Because they're afraid that if they don't believe you, they're gonna go through some bad shit. But it's not necessarily a matter of that, right? And I also want to say, like, there's certain things that go along with traditional Christianity and traditional spirituality I don't agree with. There's plenty of things. And I believe the nature of God is love. But what love looks like to one person is not the same as another. Some people, they conflate their psychological reactance with things being bad. And that's not always a good thing. You know, when you're emotionally overstimulated, sometimes you're going to have some discomfort that's going to put you in a position where you have to do something immediately, like right now, like not right now, but right now. And sometimes that's love. And when we think that love has to be something that feels good all the time, which is something that I see that's very toxic about therapy culture, we put ourselves in bad positions where we have an inability to accept any type of leadership, accountability, or authority in our lives because we're prematurely integrated. So just a concept and a mindset I want to get off is this. You know, we do need to have some concept of a spiritual worldview, a supernatural worldview. You don't even have to be living it every single day. Don't put that kind of pressure on yourself. I've done it before. It doesn't help. I've had supernatural experiences, but that's not my everyday life. And it doesn't have to be. But just have some frame of reference, and you can use, you know, I might give a study of how to do a breakdown of certain things, not to live in fear. It can add to your entertainment value, but it's just something that can help. This is Brody. I'm out.